You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. This, of course, is Black History Month. And while we're well aware that that means all 11 other months are implicitly white history, and to be deplored as such, we are nonetheless going to tackle the hysteria, and I do use the word advisedly, over critical race theory in this country. My special guest for an in-depth conversation is Janet Dewart Bell herself, a distinguished scholar and expert on social justice issues, in particular on Black history in America and its systemic racism. We're going to explore just exactly what critical race theory really is and what it's not, and the toxicity infecting those who would suppress it if they could, and what we might be doing about it. Speaking of which, at the end of the program, in Fighting Words, I'm going to suggest a short list of books on the subject of racism that are not simply good for you, like vegetables. Well, I like vegetables actually very much. But books that are brilliant, riveting, deeply and transformatively educative. They frankly will change your life, as well as delight you with their scholarship, their writing, and their passion. So stay tuned for that, but in the meanwhile, we need to go inside the headlines. As usual, the headlines are greedy, crowding out what substance might lie inside them. So, of course, this week there was the Chinese balloon crisis, the Turkish and Syrian earthquake tragedies, various trials and courtroom dramas, and a strong, age-defying State of the Union speech by President Joe Biden. All the while, climate change continues to afflict our planet. But you know what? I'm going to assume that you know all that, so I'm going to stick to my original intention of going, in fact, inside the headlines. This week, in the context of continuing our previous conversation about banned books and in the context of discussing CRT, or critical race theory, that means touching on, albeit in a cursory manner, the subject of whiteness. As regular listeners know, I've tried tackling this subject before, notably in episode 322, The Heart of Whiteness in 2020, and in episode 341, A Meditation on Whiteness in 2021. So let's give it another go. Perhaps the legal intricacies of CRT would seem less obscure, not that that matters to people who would weaponize the subject and scream their outrage that it's being taught to kindergarten kids and making them guilty, which it's not, and they're not. But perhaps the subject would seem less alien and frightening if we put the emphasis where it really belongs, on whiteness. Because critical race theory really is a story about whiteness. We don't have time or space to go into the long history of whiteness or the ways in which it's different from other racial and ethnic identities, because it has had a different history than they have. As Robert P. Baird pointed out a few years ago in The Guardian, across 3.5 centuries, whiteness has been wielded as a weapon on a global scale. Blackness, by contrast, has often been used as a shield. Close quote. As W.E.B. Du Bois put it, what made whiteness new and different was the, quote, imperial width of the thing, the heaven-defying audacity, close quote. Baird went on to point out that it's easy enough to agree in theory that the only reasonable moral response to the history of white supremacy is the abolitionist stance. That is, to make whiteness meaningless as a group identity, to shove it into obsolescence alongside Prussian and Etruscan as terms. James Baldwin described whiteness as a moral choice and way of emphasizing that it was not a natural fact. But whiteness is more than that. It's a dense network of moral choices, the vast majority of which have been made for us, oftentimes in places far distant. In fact, whiteness is a problem, like climate change or economic inequalities, is so thoroughly imbricated in the structure of our everyday lives that it makes the idea of moral choices look quaint. And the exact same thing can be said about sexism. In general, white Americans have polled as seeing that attention to racial issues, signifying a major change in American attitudes about race, all fall far short of those changes actually leading to policies that ameliorate racial inequality. At the same time, this new focus on race has prompted confusion among white people not used to thinking of themselves in racial terms, because they're the generic. Half of white Americans still think there's too much discussion of racial issues, and a similar proportion suggests that seeing racism where it doesn't exist is a bigger problem than not seeing racism where it does exist. Yet nearly everywhere in contemporary society, white is presumed to be a meaningful index of identity that, like age and gender, there's gender, is important enough to get mentioned in news accounts, tallied in political polls, and recorded in government databases. Yet what that identity is supposed to tell us is substantially in dispute. Whiteness resembles time as seen by St. Augustine. We presume we understand it as long as we're not asked to explain it, but it becomes inexplicable as soon as we're put to the test. A little more than a century ago, in his essay, The Souls of White Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois proposed what still rings as a durable insight. The discovery of personal whiteness among the world's peoples is a very modern thing, a mid-19th and 20th century matter, and that a racial category like whiteness was more akin to a religious belief than a biological fact. With only slight exaggeration, we can say that one of the most crucial developments in the discovery of personal whiteness took place during the second half of the 17th century on the periphery of the still young British Empire. Historians have largely confirmed Du Bois's suspicions that the invention of a white racial identity was motivated by Eric Williams, who later became the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, slavery was not born of racism. Rather, racism was the consequence of slavery. There was a major overlap here, a vital one, with religiosity, in particular with Christianity. Whiteness itself became the watchword for purity, particularly but not exclusively for white women. And that religious overlap soon morphed into a legal one, with colonial laws giving special privileges to Christians who, as the author of the laws, apparently never entertained the possibility that Africans might someday wish to become Christians themselves. And, too, there was the economic utility of the idea of whiteness, which helped spread rapidly around the world. In effect, it was a religion, for, like religion, it operated on every psychological, sociological, and political and economic scale, from the most intimate to the most public. Moreover, it adapted to local conditions. What it meant to be white in British Virginia was not identical to what it would mean in New York before the American Civil War, or in India during the Raj, or in Georgia during Jim Crow, in Australia after Federation, or in Germany during the Third Reich. But what united all these expressions was the singular idea. The same group of people called white was naturally superior to all others. The idea of whiteness, in other words, was identical to the idea of white supremacy. And it infected everyone. Even Mahatma Gandhi during the early part of his life, argued that, quote, the English and Indians spring from a common stock called the Indo-Aryan, and the white race in South Africa should be the proper dominating race. Close quote. What's more, white supremacy, the idea of whiteness, was a movable feast. On the one hand, there was the nonsense logic that said anyone with black ancestry could not be white. This is the one-drop rule that Jefferson wrote about, and it regulated the boundaries of whiteness. In the United States, for example, there were endless arguments over what Caucasian was supposed to mean, over the honorary Aryan status that Hitler extended to the Japanese, and so forth. Yet if the religion of whiteness was never able to gain acceptance as an unchallenged scientific fact, it was hugely successful in shaping social reality. In 1751, Ben Franklin could claim that only the English and Saxons make a, quote, principal body of white people on the face of the earth, close quote. Nearly 80 years later, Ralph Waldo Emerson would insist that the Irish, like the Chinese and the Native American, were not Caucasian. Over time, though, the definition of who counted as culturally white did expand to include Catholics from Southern Europe, the Irish, and even Jews, who for centuries had been seen as quintessential outsiders. So whiteness was an expanding category, and all the while it secured its power through conscripting laws, institutions, customs, and churches to enforce its prerogatives. And it relied on force. The near total extinction of Indians in North America, Belgian atrocities in Congo, the bloody colonization of India, East Africa, and Australia by Britain, the equally bloody colonization of North and West Africa and Southeast Asia by France, the deployment of the final solution in Nazi Germany, and the apartheid state in South Africa. And these are merely the most extreme examples. In the 80s and 90s, a group of legal scholars that included Dewart Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, Cheryl Harris, and Richard Delgado produced a body of research that became known as critical race theory, which, in Bell's words, was, quote, ideologically committed to the struggle against racism, particularly as institutionalized in and by law. Close quote. Alongside critical race theory, and in many ways derived from it, whiteness studies took shape. Historians working in that subfield demonstrated the myriad ways in which the pursuit of white supremacy, like that pursuit of wealth and the subjection of women, had been one of the central forces that shaped Anglo-American history. But by the mid-2000s, the colorblind ideological system had become so successful that it managed to shield from censure even the most obvious operations of whiteness. Overwhelming numbers of white people in corporate boardrooms, for instance, or in the media, in tech industries, all of which are the future. Furthermore, whiteness has managed to escape predictions of demographic doom before by integrating groups it had previously kept on its margins. The truth is, we don't need to become colorblind. We need to become color literate. Whiteness may seem inevitable and implacable, and Toni Morrison, the great, had it right when she said that the world will not become unracialized by assertion. Even so, after 350 years, it remains the case that whiteness is an idea, not a fact. It's up to us to transform that idea, and, black or white, that must begin with the idea of ourselves. We need to take our first break here, but stay with us for that in-depth conversation that I promised you. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My guest for today's conversation is Janet Dewart Bell. She is a social justice activist with a doctorate in leadership and change from Antioch University. She founded the Dewart Bell Lecture on Race in American Society series at the New York University School of Law in honor of her late husband, Dewart Bell, and she is the author of Lighting the Fires of Freedom, African American Women in the Civil Rights Movement, and of Blackbird Singing, Inspiring Black Women's Speeches from the Civil War to the 21st Century. And she is the co-editor with Vincent Sutherland of Carving Out a Humanity and Race, Rights, and Redemption, all published by the New Press. An Emmy Award-winning television and radio producer, she lives in New York City. She is the chair of the board for the Women's Media Center, and she also serves on the board of the Southern Center for Human Rights. And she is a pal. So I give you, with great pleasure, Janet Dewart Bell. Janet Dewart Bell, my friend, my colleague at the Women's Media Center, the board chair of our board of directors, and a true sister. Welcome back to Women's Media Center Live.
It's wonderful to be back. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here because, you know, God has blessed the Women's Media Center. We have on our board, I tell you, a stellar bunch of people. And when
we certainly do.
And when I was thinking with my teeth grinding, I've tackled it in 6 different ways before, but I've really got to get into the attacks on CRT, critical race theory, that are going on in this country. I thought, of course, immediately of you. Not just because you're the board chair, but because your dear, great, late husband, Dewart Bell, Professor Dewart Bell, was called often the godfather of critical race theory. So it's sort of like going to the source. So let's start, if you don't mind, with a very sort of simple, almost kindergarten version for those people who have been on Mars about what CRT is. I mean, you and I know it's just simply called the truth, but what it is in terms of systemic racism.
Yes. Well, critical race theory really grew out of critical legal studies, and it was intended to be an intelligent, somewhat dispassionate at times, discussion of systemic racism at the law school level. But as we know, over the years, and particularly the last few years, it has been weaponized by people who have no idea what it is and who would say just the opposite, that it is not the truth, but that's what it is. It's the truth about our history. It's the truth of race in the American in American history and the impact on that. I mean, some people would say we even started before 1619, but 1619 is a good enough place to start. Yeah. And people want to deny what has happened to the history of enslaved Africans in this country and why they were here and what that has done to what has done for what became America, and also what has been done to them, to the people whose origins are in Africa. And so critical race theory really takes a look at our history. It's supposed to be with a clear eye and an open heart, but we know that's not the case.
No, it's not the case, because we've got to at some point get into discussing school boards and why we all better suddenly run for school board, because school boards in this country at this time are definitely weaponized and are highly critical and abusive and threatening, for that matter, to anyone who would purport to, even mention critical race theory, even when it is not taught at the legal level. It is not taught at, to kindergarten children. It is not even
It is
taught at
not.
all. It's not even taught. So, they're campaigning and fundraising and getting elected, unfortunately, on a basis that doesn't exist. It's like the rest of Trumpism. It's a complete fantasy.
And those school boards and those people on school boards who are trying to do the right thing, and that is to educate our children, are being attacked. It's incredible. I can barely even speak about how something that should be a public service
Yeah.
has become. You really have to have a badge of courage to be a good member of a school board, to try to defend the right of our children to learn, to defend the literature that is being banned
Yeah.
by politicians who they're the same kind of politicians who want to take away women's right to choose. This is all part of this same removing the last few centuries of development and civilization in this country. It's really time for people to take a real strong look at the connections between all of these attacks on critical race theory and how that's used as a distraction to keep people away from other issues that they might immediately have a better sense that they can relate to. Because, to be honest, some people think that they know about race because we're all a race, and they don't, but they don't think about the fact that race is a social construct.
Of course.
And race, and part of the way race has been used in American society, it is giving people certain rights. Certain immigrants, for instance, who came here, they came here and they were not considered white, but they gradually became white as a way, number one, to integrate them in society, but to integrate them in society and to keep other people not integrated in society.
Because there always had to be somebody lower on the totem pole than they. I mean, somebody on whose neck they in turn could stand,
Yes, Toni Morrison used to say that the first word people learned when they came here, that some immigrants, I don't want to paint too broad a brush with this, is the first word they learned was one which was disparaging of African Americans.
Yeah,
I'll leave it like that.
Yeah, I think we get your point. I'm going to end this program later on with a whole list of recommended books that I have found just absolute basics in learning the truth about my country, and I thought I was fairly literate. But
You are.
No, well, I discovered new depths of ignorance. I mean, for example, I never knew that slavery, in addition to enslavement, and never in addition to buying and selling of human beings, enslavement also involved mortgaging them. I'd never encountered the mortgage of a human being. But that's one of many, 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 many aspects.
But that's part of the property. As slaves, chattel slavery.
Right.
Slavery has been in existence forever.
Yeah.
America had the chattel slavery. People treated so much as property. So if you treated people like property, you could do anything with them.
Right.
You can mortgage them, as you said.
Yeah, and you can, in fact, as a number of these books also go into the price for their pound of flesh by Diana Ramsey Berry shows the market for dead enslaved Africans after they had been killed.
Mm-hmm.
upon which all medical schools in this country thrived. So there is no moment from infancy in your mother's womb, because in fact slavery was chartered by the mother. So you were a slave when you were in her womb before you were even born,
Mm-hmm.
straight through past death when you were not commodified. And these kinds of embedded racism. This is not jargon. This is not, beat the tambourine and call for revolution, a kind of naivete that we had in the 60s and the 70s. This is just beginning to get down to the real stuff. And partly,
It says,
no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was saying, and it says to us, if we understand that, what do we take? First of all, what do we take away from that? What we take away from that is, if we look the other way and
Yeah.
don't appreciate the true history, then all of us, no matter what our race, are complicit
That's right.
in how the system perpetuates itself.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is to really understand, and that's what critical race theory tries to do. And one of those books I hope that you have on your list is Dewart Bell's Faces at the Bottom of the Well.
Yeah.
Because that many times I've talked to younger people, that is people who came of age around the mid 90s when that book was published, and they say to me, that was probably the single biggest book, that the influence that they had in learning about race. And so I always say those are the non-law students. The law students have other books that they talk about.
Sure.
But Faces at the Bottom of the Well really tells the story, and it tells it in a way that people can understand. It's in narrative, and it's relatively straightforward language. It's not legalistic at all.
That's right. This is also the value, of course, of the 1619 Project.
Yes.
From Nicole Hannah Jones, Pulitzer Prize winning writer for the New York Times, and that whole
and MacArthur winner,
and every kind of possible winner. God love her; she's just fantastic.
She's fabulous.
Yeah, she really is. And a book came out of it, and a documentary, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And of course, they are fighting to keep it out of schoolrooms, because the documentary is extremely powerful. I've taken to going around and just sort of asking people, like New Yorkers, fellow New Yorkers, do you know what happened in 1712? And there'll be this dead silence, and then they'll say, well, I imagine because it was before 1776, it must have been something with the Revolution. And I said, well, indirectly. And I wait, and they don't know that there was an uprising of enslaved Africans in New York at that time, and quite a major one. And that when people were caught, they were burned alive. So the amazing thing is the way this has been disappeared. And we know why, and we know the waves of Ku Klux Klan and the waves of white reaction and the waves of that have always met even the tiniest step forward. But I know that African American Policy Forum, which with Kim Crenshaw at its helm, is doing amazing thing, has a whole project called Books Unbanned and another one called Truth Be Told, and so do a number of other sources. But how do we turn this around? And that's an unfair question to ask you, but
no, it's not an unfair question. It is the question to ask. The question is that we have to keep saying there will be some people who will get it, and unfortunately there'll be some people who will never get it. We have to connect the humanity of what we're talking about, because it's not a Black story.
No, no,
It's
no,
not
no.
just an African. I know you know this, but it really it connects so much to the other things, dynamics of American society. The fact that America, and I'll call it America, even though I know we had this long process and a Revolutionary War and all this sort of
Right,
stuff.
right, right.
You, you know that stuff. But what it but what race does the what race does in this society is that it is used to keep people subjugated, and not
Hmm.
just black people. It is
Right.
used to distract people. It is it's used to promote fear of the other. And so while there are people who are doing that, they're taking away rights from women, that 50-year-old rights. We've seen that recently, and people say, why is that connected? It's absolutely connected.
Sexism and racism are embedded in each other. They
They
are
they are.
indissoluble knot, and you cannot free one strand without the other, and they remain, knotted, so long as they remain together.
And we have to say, for example, Obama never won the majority of the white vote, and
Yeah.
particularly the white women's vote. White women can turn this around. So I say to my white sisters, I appreciate that you think that and know that there is a task, there is a black woman's burden, shall we say,
Mm.
in terms of liberation struggles. But there's also the responsibility of all of us to do what we can to, in terms of liberation. It's not about other people's liberation. It's about our own liberation and about our own freedom. It's about democracy for all of us. And that seems to me such a simple thing, and I just don't understand why people don't get it.
Well, I think
But I keep
I can give
trying.
you one possible clue, and I think it's something
Okay.
we've got to wrestle with. I think they confuse responsibility with guilt. And guilt is boring.
Ah,
Guilt is a paralyzing emotion. It's boring, 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 and it also paralyzes people because they think, well, then what's the point? No, no, no. Uh, and so
that's a great point.
if we take guilt out of the equation and say, look, you didn't do this, you're not responsible. You go, however, if you don't do something about it now, then you begin to be responsible. But you're not responsible
Mm-hmm.
for the past. You're not responsible
That's
for
right.
for Jefferson being a slave owner, and for Washington being a slave, and for the first 16 presidents to have come from the South, and for this country in a large part being founded on cotton, and for cotton for a large part being founded on the backs of Africans. And so you're not responsible. You can lift all that and throw it away. But you are responsible for George Floyd. You are responsible for what
Mm-hmm.
happens now. You are responsible especially to the fact that black women die in maternal mortality rates higher than white women and anybody else in this country. So let's start with right now, and that's very freeing. That's how I present it to them, and sometimes it actually works. And it's liberating and it's positive. So let's get to work. But I think,
I think that's it.
anyway, I think that's one possibility. Go ahead.
No, I think that's a wonderful way to state that. Do not conflate responsibility and guilt,
Right.
because what it does is that's paralyzing, or it's so
Boring.
frustrating. Yes, the people can't move beyond that. But it's really but but they cannot. But to continue to allow, when we know
Mm-hmm.
what is going on. People understand that there is systemic racism. Many of them do, but they figure that it's not going to bother them. Maybe
Right.
some people feel like that. I always go with that. And then they came for me, and enough people to speak up. Right.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they
And
also get very defensive in terms of children. And here we're back to schools, because they say, I've heard these arguments, and this is going on all over the country. This is in Clark County, this is in Tucson, this is in Salt Lake City, all over Colorado. Parents are showing up, conservative parents, and taking over school boards, and saying we don't want our white children being made to feel guilty for sins they never committed. So that's an entry point, I think, for us to say, well, they're not guilty. They are not guilty. So we're trying, but don't you want them to be responsible, like to a good neighbor? Don't you want them to be responsible citizens? Don't you want them? So in that same vein, they're responsible for the future of this country. And that means starting right now. I don't know that that's going to work, Janet, but it's a possible approach. At least
But
one.
we have to do that. But the other thing too, when you're talking about education, that there's so many issues that are intertwined, and people focus so much on race, and they don't, and which to me is the subtext of all of this in a sense. But they don't realize that while they're doing that, while we're worrying about white fragility and our kids feeling bad, what about Black children feeling bad? In terms of the future, they are being. What I try to say, and I haven't, and I need to. I think I need to have a longer conversation with you offline, because you state this so much more eloquently than I, but try to figure out how to let people know that when they're being distracted by certain kinds of issues, that's when people come in and they're able to say, well, let's not worry about the polar caps melting. Let's not worry about climate change and things like that. We have more immediate issues. All of these issues now are immediate issues,
Right.
and if we don't solve, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. You're right. And in fact, I think one of the most positive things is the way that movements, sometimes with a little backstage arm wrestling, but mostly not, are working together now. So you get people turning out for climate change who are originally CRT people. You get feminists turning out for Native American rights. There's this whole vast overlap, which was not always the case when people were jostling for funding or for publicity or in years past. And I find that very encouraging, because young people don't give a damn, and they know that the planet itself and their future and their own self-interest is at stake, and so they're up for it, But we've got to get to a nitty-gritty where, apparently it's very difficult to get elected to school boards in most areas of the country. And we got on right after the George Floyd tragedy. There was a huge influx of liberals onto school boards. Everybody felt very guilty, and so somebody it was a terrible thing, George Floyd. Let's put them on the school board. But now things have turned around drastically, and now you have firing of superintendents of schools, and you have you have a network of backlash in a culture war about race. So we have to calm our jets and somehow get ourselves onto school board. I don't even know what my school board is in New York City. Do you know what yours is? I mean, nobody I know knows. So we got to find out and begin to focus there. I think that's one place.
I think school boards by itself, I think that's an important issue, but I think we also need to have people who will courageously spin a narrative of progressive narrative about how we all need to work together on various issues. The school boards it's clearly an important issue, but it's only one. It's the criminalization of poverty, the criminal justice system, all of that stuff. It is at play, and I think part of the thing is that that they're not. The one thing about progressives, we and I consider myself a progressive. Actually, I consider myself way liberal.
I was just going to say,
But
you're a screaming radical.
and
But a very
I'm one of those
polite and
people who,
elegant
like,
one.
I'm one of those people who, like John Lewis says, tries to make good trouble.
Yeah.
And but 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 who will challenge the system even while having a sense of righteous anger coupled with a sense of compassion, with courage, and a commitment to change, to commitment for positive change for all people. I think we have to elect people who will do that. And we try sometimes, and then unfortunately, the way the system is, then they start angling for more funds for the police. No, the police don't need more funds. I truly believe that. And then they start. We elect people who are who claim to be progressive, and then they get elected and they take a hard right because that's how the funding, the lobbyists are pushing people and what have you. And we're seeing it in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just we've got to call it out, and people are shy about calling it out because the negative forces now have gotten so much more violent. I mean, people show up at your home armed these days.
I know.
So I understand all that. But you know what? When I think about the civil rights movement and people who, in the heat of the battle in the civil rights movement in the rural South, for instance, they did not have the kind of protection that many of us have, and but they took a stand anyway because what's that song? Before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I mean, they no one wanted that. We people were not angling for the cross, but they knew that in order to make a difference, to fight for freedom, they had to be courageous and bold. And it wasn't about them. That's right. Mm-hmm. It was about the people who came behind them. It was a sense of community and a sense of building for the future, a future that they might never see.
Well, you're absolutely right. And one of the reasons why I love the books that I'm going to name at the end of the program and others, but in particular the books, is that even those few people, and this damned few, who turn rightward, they've already said it in their books, and the books stick around. But mostly nobody's turned rightward. These people have stayed true to their vision. And it's far, far, far from being a grim vision. I mean, what is related in these books is startling, shocking, and stunning in its cruelty and its inventiveness. But the overall tone is so joyous. It is a voice of a people who are saying, damn it, no, we're going to keep trying. We're going to rise up and keep trying again now. Okay, now we're going to do it again and again and again, over and over and over again, from Ona Judge, who was enslaved by George Washington, straight through to Annette Gordon Reed, who did the great book about the Hemmingses, and all of these other writers, most of them women, interestingly enough, all of them feminists, and there's this whole new burgeoning scholarship among women of color who are feminists and who are, at the same time, they're unearthing the history of their people. They're also unearthing the history of their women people. And wow, it makes for such ecstatically beautiful reading. So
I used to ask my mother, my late mother, who I just adored, what gives you hope? Mm-hmm. And my mother would say, because we're still here.
You got it. Oh, Janet, thank you. Thank you for being you and for being the board chair of the Women's Media Center, but also especially for all the work that you've done and you're doing and you will do. And just bless your heart, and thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
Well, thank you. May I say that one thing that I've been saying lately, and I believe it right down through my bones, is that we, as women, as people of color, we have no choice but to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's a pretty good choice, I'd say.
I think so.
Thank you, my dear.
Thank you very much.
It's time for our final break, but I'll be back directly with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Critical race theory. Those are apparently fighting words. But then, so are the words, the truth. Many white people still feel it's okay to boast about being color blind. But in a racist society, color blindness about race is impossible. What we white people need to become is color literate, which takes some work. I believe in the transformative alchemy of good writing. So periodically I assemble what I hope might serve as suggestions, a maybe helpful, no annotated short list of compelling books on, in this case, this subject. I've suggested some of these books before, and a few were published a while ago, but most are quite recent. The list could run into the thousands, so I'm splitting it up, part this week, part next week. They're all nonfiction. Now, fortunately, we live at a time of a great flowering in scholarship on and mostly by African American women. And these books, my personal choices, largely focus on the enslavement of black women in the United States. This is a new, crucial unearthing of black history and U.S. history and feminist history that has been denied to black Americans and from which white Americans have been kept ignorant. Almost all of these authors have been guests on this podcast. The episodes on which they appeared can be found indexed in the archives of Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan, where each of these books has been discussed in detail, along with numerous others on this and related subjects. All of these authors share standards of excellence and a generous capacity for irony, as in dealing with the contradictions embodied in Washington, Jefferson, and Madison, father of the Constitution, all slaveholders. These authors are not interested in simplistic denunciation that will raise what they well know is the already high defensiveness of many white readers. They're interested in facts and in how the compartmentalization actually worked, which is precisely the lesson we need to learn today. If you're an African American reader or other reader of color who happens not to know some of these books, I'd wager that you'll come more into your own power through them. If you're a European American or other white reader, you might discover that this knowledge can free you from the unbearable whiteness of being and make you furious at having been denied what you had a right to know. Guilt is not the point. Guilt is counterproductive and, most of all, boring. Knowledge is the point, and is also powerful. Power to change things. Here's the list. Color literate book suggestions. Robin's personal list. Black Women in White America, a Documentary History by Gerda Lerner. a classic from the great historian who felt strongly that, quote, women must place themselves at the absolute center of history and look out from that vantage point, close quote. Here she's assembled from multiple sources, historical quotes as well as written documents by Black women in their own voices about their own reality. Faces at the Bottom of the Well, by civil rights activist and legal scholar Dewart Bell, using allegory and historical example, including the classic story The Space Traders, to argue that racism is an integral, permanent part of American society and that African American struggles for equality are doomed to fail so long as the majority of whites don't see their own well-being threatened by the status quo. New England Bound, Slavery and Colonization in Early America, by Wendy Warren. A study of how slave trading contributed to the rapid growth and economic success of the northern colonies. Did you know, for example, that it was not Virginia that first legalized slavery in the colonies, but Massachusetts in 1641? By the middle of the century, more slaves inhabited the North than all of the Chesapeake. By the 1680s, over half the ships plying waters up and down the Boston coast were intrinsically tied to the commerce in Caribbean rum, sugar, and enslaved human beings. So, it was in the North. Never Caught, the Washingtons' relentless pursuit of their runaway slave, Ona Judge, by Erica Armstrong Dunbar. When the brain balks at the waves of statistics and the enormous scope of enslavement as an institution, the heart needs a specific story. Well, Dr. Dunbar, distinguished professor of Black Studies and History at the University of Delaware, put a face on such a story. When George and Martha Washington moved from Mount Vernon in Virginia to Philadelphia, then the nation's capital, they brought 9 enslaved people with them. But Philadelphia had a law requiring slaveholders to free their slaves after 6 months. So clever George thought he would circumvent the law by sending his slaves back south every 6 months, resetting the clock. Martha's chief attendant, Ona Judge, was an intelligent young woman who figured this out, and before she could be sent back to the plantation to be reset, she ran. This is the only book that examines the life of an 18th century fugitive woman in detail and lends us a shift in perception about the father of our country. At the end of her life, Ona Judge granted interviews to 2 reporters for abolitionist newspapers. Her voice comes alive in this true story of escape and pursuit. The Hemmingses of Monticello, An American Family, by Annette Gordon Reed. This is from the Pulitzer Prize-winning author who brought us the truth about Jefferson and Sally Hemings, complete with all the attendant ironies of Jefferson having been so committed to the rights of mankind, plus the complexities that Sally, his enslaved de facto wife, was the half-sister of his dead white wife, and the 2 women shared similar features and coloring. Gordon Reed presents intimate, intricate, familial truths with a compassion balanced by the precise eye of a historian and one who can really write. This is a brilliant, heart-rending work, and I also recommend that you see Gordon Reed's earlier work, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Jefferson's Daughters, 3 Sisters, White and Black, in a Young America, by Catherine Kerrison. Perceptions of the new nation via the stories of 3 women, Harriet Hemings, Jefferson's black daughter with Sally Hemings, and Martha and Maria Jefferson, his white daughters with his deceased wife, Martha Wells Jefferson. Apparently, with the assistance of Jefferson himself, Harriet escaped slavery, left Monticello, and probably passed into white society. The price for their pound of flesh, the value of the enslaved from the womb to the grave in the building of a nation, by Dana Ramey Berry. This book delivers shock on shock, even if you thought you knew something about the subject. Dr. Berry, professor of history and African diaspora studies at the University of Texas, has done research both stupendous and specific. In life and in death, slaves were commodities, their monetary value assigned based on age, sex, health, and market demands. A pregnant woman cost more at market, 2 for the price of 1. Plus, it meant she was fertile for the future, including through rape, because the law sanctioned slavery through a woman's womb. A man could rape, impregnate, and increase his wealth in slaves, all at the same time. So careful attention was paid to female slaves' gynecological health. Indeed, the father of gynecology, so-called, Dr. James Marion Sims, conducted his research on enslaved women, sometimes performing experiments without anesthesia because it was expensive and they were, quote, merely slaves. Every aspect of an enslaved person's life was commodified. Corpses were harvested and anatomized because the products had to make it to their destinations well preserved in cadaver bags. Physicians at Southern and Northern medical schools participated in this booming business. Although slavery supposedly ended in 1865, the black cadaver trade, which Dr. Berry terms the ghost value of deceased African Americans, many formerly enslaved, continued until the 1880s. More to come next week. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. That's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.